Hello everyone, my name is Ella. We are Group 6. Today we are going to talk about case study 3. The topic of the case is designing the production networks at CoolWipes. Next slide, please. So we will have 6 parts in our presentation. The first part is introduction. Second, statement of the purpose. Third, problem description. The fourth, problem-solving methodology. The fifth, results and discussion. And the last part will be our conclusions. So next, I'm going to talk about part 1, introduction. Next slide, please. CoolWipes established in the late 1980s, produced baby wipes and diaper ointments. Currently, it set up his production facility only in Chicago and distributed both products from this plant for the whole nation. With the development of the company, the transportation costs had dramatically increased and were expected to continue to grow in the next few years. The company is struggling with its increasingly huge transportation cost. So it is necessary for the company to think about the way to control these costs and increase their profits in the end. Next slide, please. The data about the capacity, annual fixed cost, and variable cost per unit for each production line had been given in this case. Moreover, the new network options had been identified, and the capacity and fixed cost and the variable cost per unit of each new production line of the wipes and ointment had been provided in this case. The transportation cost from each plant to each demand region had also been given. Next slide, please. So we can see from the two tables the data. And next slide, please. And also the data about the capacity, annual fixed cost, and variable cost per unit for each production line for different locations. Next slide, please. Therefore, Matt had to make a decision about whether to build one or more plants, where to build it, and what lines should be installed, so as to reduce the transportation cost and lower the total cost of selling both products of wipes and ointment. Next part, I'm going to talk about the statement of the purpose. The purpose of our analysis is aimed to find the optimal network solution to minimize the total cost. In this case, it is to identify the total costs of different alternatives and recommend an optimal solution with minimum total cost for CoolWipes, where customers' demands for all the regions are satisfied. Setting up new plants might help to save the transportation cost, but it might also increase the fixed cost. The analysis will help the company identify all the decision variables and their influences on the total cost. Next slide, please. During the analysis of all the given data, if Matt ignores some decision variables or undermines their influences, he might make an unwise decision that will be more costly compared to the optimal solution. If the company fails to identify the optimal solution, their total cost for both production lines will greatly increase, which will significantly lower their profit in a few years and might negatively affect their competitive in the market. Next, so my group member will introduce the next part about problem description.
I'm Panting Zhou. Next, I will continue to problem describe and problem solving methodology parts. Here are 3 questions. To answer these questions, we will use Excel to analyze. The first question, what is the annual cost of serving the entire nation from Chicago? After a simple calculation, we know that the total cost to serve the entire nation from Chicago is more than $18.7 million, a total cost equal to wipes total cost plus all ointments total cost. and the total cost of wipes and ointments include transportation costs, fixed costs, and variable costs respectively. Part A of the second question is asked about do you recommend adding any plants and where should the plants be built and what lines should be included. So here we need Excel to solve it. First, we set the demand variables as follows. Xij means wipes production from I to J, Yij means ointments production from I to J. WI means whether to establish wipes production line. OI means whether to establish ointment production line. I includes Chicago, Princeton, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. J includes the entire nation. Second, we set the objective function to solve mean total cost, which is equal to wipes total cost plus ointments total cost. The exact equations are as follows. Next, we set the constraints. The first consideration is that the production must be less than the maximal production of each region. Second, the production should meet the demand of each region. As the constraints are shown in this picture. And also, we set Wi and OI to the constraints of binary. WC and OC need to be set equal to 1 because the plant in Chicago are already exist. According to the above conditions, Excel data analysis model is established. Thus, transportation rates at different prices are considered respectively, and the conclusions are as follows. For question 2A part, transportation costs unchanged, we propose that wipes production lines should be established in Chicago, Princeton, and Los Angeles, and that the ointment production line should remain in Chicago. The same thing in question 2B part, just the transportation cost be cut in half. In this case, we think Matt should just keep the wipes and the ointments production lines in Chicago and shouldn't add any new plants. Next, in question 2C part, transportation costs are double. After calculation, we find that the situation of the plants is the same as that in question 2A part, that wipes production lines should be established in Chicago, Princeton, and Los Angeles, and that the ointment production line should remain in Chicago. At the same time, the total cost will also increase due to the increase of transportation costs.
Hello class, my name is Rezwan Ahmed, and I'm going to discuss what are the options that Matt needs to consider before he makes his decision. So firstly, assuming that if Matt did not have the Chicago plan, and if he wanted to change all his production plan into different things, what could have been done? So moving on, we need to understand, moving on to the next slide. First, we need to understand what are the factors that needs to stay constant and what are the demands that he needs to meet. So considering that Chicago plan, he already has a Chicago plan. So for setting up the Princeton, Atlanta, and Los Angeles plans, as you can see in the topmost Excel table, the fixed cost is the exact same, and also the variable cost is the exact same for wipes and ointment. So in the middle table, you can see that the demand differs from Northwest, Southwest, Upper Midwest, and moving on to Southeast. So what we need to do is that make a combination of where to set up the plan so that it's closest to its region. So for that, we made up the table that you have already seen, and this is the solver. For solver, it's very simple. We use the total cost as the set objective, and we use the plan binary constraint. So if it's 1, the plan remains, and if it's 0, the plan doesn't. So it's very simple. For the demand tables, we need to make sure that the demand is equal to 0 so that all the demand is met no matter where the region is and where the plant location is. And for non-negative constraint, we need to use all the capacity and can't use it to negative. So we need to keep it to positive. So moving on, for the first case, we see that without Chicago, as you can see in the lower table in the fixed column, without Chicago for WIPES variables, we need to make it from all the rest of the three. That is Princeton, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. For ointment variables, it's only from Atlanta. And if you can see the WIPES variables table, it's for different locations, it's applied to different places. So for this way, he can distribute his production, decentralize it into different places, and in the same time make his transportation costs lower because it's closer to the places. So moving on. So what's the result of it? We can see that the total cost actually decreases. The total cost is now 85,102,400, and this is actually 2,085,859,000 lower than the actual cost that he's making now. So from this, we can recommend to Matt and suggest him that if he moves on from Chicago to 3 new plants, this actually saves him production cost in the future. And for this, he only needs to make WIPES production plan into the 3 places, and for ointments, he only needs to make it in Atlanta. So that is where we are. Moving on, what if in the near future transportation cost changes? So now we will consider that if transportation cost decreases, and for that we'll consider if it's halved by what it is now, what will happen? So using the same solver model, what we got is that it's almost very similar. In the WIPES variables, as you can see, the Princeton, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, we're going to produce it, as you can see in the fixed column. For ointment, it's the same. We only produce it from Atlanta. And also most of the things inside are also the same because the plants are created in terms of the location where it's best applied to. So moving on to the next slide. The difference is this time the total cost is $74,251,200, which is actually $13,710,200 lower than that. So by this, we can understand that if transportation cost was decreased, and only if we would consider transportation cost as our biggest factor, then moving away from Chicago and into 3 new plants is actually the best way to do it. But the reality is, as you can see in the next slide, the transportation cost is actually increasing as we can see in the references in the cases. So this time we will do our calculation as if transportation cost is doubled. So if we consider that transportation cost is doubled, what we get are different results. This time we see that since the Chicago plant is already built, producing WIPES variables inside Chicago and Princeton and Los Angeles is actually the best way, but only for the ointment variables, we move on to Atlanta. So as you can see that our demand is met by different places, by different plants. And by this, we can see that, into the next slide, that the total cost actually increases by a lot. This is now $106,324,800, and the total production cost has increased by $18,363,400, which is a really big raise. And this can actually make our profits into losses. So for this, we need to consider that the ointment will only be distributed from Atlanta, while WIPES can be distributed from all regions except Atlanta. So this will be all from me, and these are the analyses that we have already conducted. Thank you.
Hello, Professor. I'm Xinyu Jiang. I'm going to introduce our results and the discussion. Next, please. Under the question 3 situation, if the manager wants to design a new network, he has to consider 2 aspects: the cost of building new plants and is it worth to operate them, and how its varying transportation costs affect his decision. So our recommendation is that after our analysis, we can conclude that unless transportation costs change, decentralizing production from Chicago to Princeton, Orlando, and Los Angeles is the optimum choice. If transportation cost reduces, the decision remains the same. However, this recommendation is not realistic since the transportation will increase in that case. Only if transportation costs looks to be increasing, that is doubled in the near future, then it is profitable to stay with Chicago. Next. So in reality, the best plan is to build a new WIPES line in Princeton and Los Angeles. WIPES produced in Princeton will be used to supply Northeast and the Southeast. WIPES produced in Los Angeles will be used to supply Northwest and the Southwest. There's 2 reasons for us to recommend this new plan. The first one is lower cost. We combine the original cost and the new cost, and the new cost is lower. And the second one is that the new plan can provide us new capacity. So it is better than the original one. And the third one is that we also combine the cost of both plan, and there's a double transportation cost situation, and the new plan still has the lower cost. So that's the third reasons for us to choose the new plan. Next, please. And the last part is our conclusion. Next. So whether in the current situation or in the future, when transportation costs rise, the optimal solution for the company is to build new webs line in Princeton and Los Angeles. Webs in Princeton supply northeast and southeast. Webs line in Los Angeles supply northwest and southwest. It is a solution that takes into account the cost, increasing transportation prices, and production capacity. We believe it is the most beneficial solution for the company's development. Thank you.